What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, undefeated 3-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the WBO welterweight world champion, who is widely considered by many to be the #1 best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Terence Bud Crawford. He did an interview to promote his upcoming fight with two-time welterweight world champion superstar boxer Showtime Shawn Porter. That's scheduled for November 20th, Mandalay Bay Arena, Las Vegas, Nevada. With that said, in this interview, there were a few interesting takes. One in particular, Terence Crawford and former 2-division world champion, superstar boxer turned colorful analyst Timothy Bradley, and Olympic gold medalist, undefeated retired Hall of Fame superstar, iconic boxer Andre S.O.G. Ward, along with many others from ESPN, they conducted this interview in which Terence Crawford, he stated that the only reason this fight is happening between himself and Shawn Porter is because Shawn Porter wanted this fight. Shawn Porter, 31 wins, 3 losses, 2 draws, 15 wins by way of knockout, 33 years of age, stands at 5'6", 5'7", with a 69-inch arm reach. Shawn Porter has been pushing for this fight. Now, here goes the contradiction with undefeated 37-0, no loss and no draws, 27 wins by way of knockout, stands at 5'8", with a 74-inch arm reach, 33 years of age, Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford, he stated that he finally cornered a PBC, Premier Boxing Champions, and founder advisor Al Heyman, fighter in the corner, that they're going to have to fight him. But in the same token, he contradicts himself, and he says this fight is only happening because Shawn Porter wants this fight to happen. When asked why he is able to get Shawn Porter in the ring and not undefeated unified WBC IBF welterweight world champion superstar boxer who is widely considered by many to be top 3 best pound-for-pound fighters in the world, in Errol the True Spence Jr. 27 wins, no loss, no draws, 21 wins by way of knockout. Errol Spence, 31 years of age, stands at 5'9.5" with a 72-inch arm reach. How come he could get Shawn Porter in the ring, but not Errol Spence, which makes up for the biggest fight in the sport of boxing? And Terence Crawford indirectly contradicted himself by saying the reason he getting Shawn Porter in the ring and not Errol Spence is because Shawn Porter wanted this fight and pushed for this fight, and Errol Spence has it. So it's okay for Terence Crawford to sit idle and not push for these fights to happen. The other side has to push for this fight to happen. And he says he placing blame on Al Heyman and the fighters on the PBC, but not placing the blame where it belongs on himself and legendary promoter, top-ranked CEO and promoter Bob Arum, who promotes Terence Crawford with ESPN and Top Rank, for not making these fights happen. So he continues to say that he cornered a fighter in Shawn Porter, now placed him in a position where he has to fight him. No, you did not corner Shawn Porter in this fight. The WBO, World Boxing Organization, pushed for this fight. And your promoter, Bob Arum, he stated he didn't want this fight, and he even called the WBC up. He phoned them up and asked them, why did they order this fight to come to fruition? And the WBC, clearly, their response was in response to Bob Arum not being happy that they ordered this fight to go to a 30-day negotiation period or a purse bid. And Bob Arum, he responded by saying that the WBO told him, well, we gave you a pass, essentially, and gave you a lot of leeway because he hasn't had a mandatory in 2 years. And so Bob Arum, he stated, well, I guess we're going to have to fight Shawn Porter. But then he goes on to say, but at least we're getting the best fighting the best. But Bob Arum is on record saying that he's unwilling to pay Shawn Porter more than $1 million purse, guaranteed. Bob Arum is on record letting the world know that he prevented Terence Crawford from fighting legendary 8-division world champion, iconic Filipino superstar boxer, Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao, who Terence Crawford had been trying to secure a fight with him for 5 years, and he's admitting on numerous occasions that he did. Even in this interview, he stated that Manny Pacquiao was the #1 objective. And if he couldn't get Manny Pacquiao, the number 2 objective, plan B, was always Shawn Porter. But you didn't initiate any negotiations with Shawn Porter, and then you admitted that Shawn Porter is the reason this fight is happening. When asked why Errol Spence fight with you hasn't happened, and you say Errol Spence doesn't have the same energy you have about making this fight. Well, let's go to the videotape, because Terence Crawford is on record when he came to the division, and he says that when asked by Max Kellerman and Stephen A. Smith about the biggest fight in boxing between himself and Errol Spence, and he said, that's not the biggest fight in the sport of boxing. That's the biggest fight to you guys. The biggest fight in the sport of boxing is himself and Keith Thurman, former unified welterweight world champion superstar boxer. And he's on record saying, I live by the mantra of, in order to beat a man, you have to beat the man. And the man is Keith Thurman, not Errol Spence. And Stephen A. Smith responds and says, well, Errol Spence is the goods. From my eye test, he looks like he's going to be the goods. And he says, your eyes can be deceiving you. Your eyes can be lying to you. This is what Terence Crawford had to say when it regarded to himself and Errol Spence in the same equation. And he says that's not the biggest fight in the sport of boxing. This is before it even got big enough to come to fruition. Then he contradicts himself again by saying that Shawn Porter didn't want this fight when he was a champion. Neither did the fans in the sport of boxing. They're only calling for this fight because Shawn Porter is no longer a champion. But when he was a champion, he wasn't thinking about fighting Terence Crawford. Incorrect. When Shawn Porter was a champion at the IBF champion, Terence Crawford was at 135. He wasn't even a junior welterweight yet. That's when Shawn Porter first won his belt and was campaigning with the IBF title before he lost it to Kell Brook. Terence Crawford wasn't even a junior welterweight, let alone a welterweight. He hadn't become undisputed at junior welterweight. He was still fighting for his first world title against Ricky Burns at 135 at lightweight. Then Terence Crawford, Shawn Porter lost his belt to Kell Brook. By the time he regained it, when he fought Danny Garcia for the vacant WBC title that was stripped from Keith Thurman due to inactivity, after Keith Thurman had beaten Danny Garcia for the belt, Shawn Porter and Danny Garcia fought, and then Shawn Porter beat Danny Garcia, and they already had a contract. The winner was going to fight Errol Spence in a unification bout. Okay? And keep this in mind. Errol Spence got in the ring with Shawn Porter after Shawn Porter beat Danny Garcia and asked Shawn Porter, we're going to make this fight happen. Then Errol Spence had a mandatory, IBF mandatory, by the name of Yordenis Ugas. Okay? And Yordenis Ugas was person to be the mandatory. So, to satisfy both parties, what they did was they allowed Errol Spence to fight 4-division world champion Mexican superstar boxer Mikey Garcia, who had been calling out Errol Spence. And then Shawn Porter took on Errol Spence's mandatory to clear the path for them to come together and fight for their unification bout, which took place September 28th of 2019. And then he lost the belt to Errol Spence. He didn't have an opportunity to have a defense win the belt outside of beating Yordenis Ugas, in which most people thought he lost, that being Shawn Porter. Yordenis Ugas just defeated Manny Pacquiao via unanimous decision, and he's the WBA super champion now. But Yordenis Ugas, Shawn Porter fought Yordenis Ugas instead of Errol Spence having to fight Yordenis Ugas. They were able to satisfy everybody and give Yordenis Ugas an opportunity at a world title. It was the WBC instead of the IBF. And Errol Spence fought against Mikey Garcia. Then the two came together. That's after Shawn Porter defeated Danny Garcia. So, and then he lost the belt to Errol Spence. So when did he have the opportunity, when he was a world champion, to start calling out Terence Crawford's name? He didn't. He didn't have an opportunity because then he lost it to Errol Spence. So Terence Crawford will tell the world that Shawn Porter is only calling him out because he's naked now in the street and he don't have a belt. But that's not the case. Because when he did have a belt, he didn't have an opportunity to fight you For one, when he was the IBF champion, you wasn't even a thought in nobody's mind because you was just becoming a world champion for the first time in your career against Ricky Burns at 135. You hadn't accomplished 3 divisions and undisputed at junior welterweight. That hadn't happened yet. Then he lost the belt to Kell Brook. You still wasn't a welterweight. And then when he got a belt again, he had already had a contract in place to fight Errol Spence in a major fight. Okay? So then, now we know, you just look at the pay-per-view numbers when he says that Errol Spence has been avoiding him and hasn't kept the same energy about fighting him. That's why this fight hasn't happened. But on the contrary, he doesn't say and have the same energy when it comes to Manny Pacquiao fight when Manny Pacquiao was signed to Top Rank and ESPN and Bob Arum, and you still couldn't get that fight. And Bob Arum told you he prevented the fight from happening for numerous of reasons. And a few, just to jump out at you, is he said that Manny Pacquiao was a close friend. He didn't want to see him get hurt because he knew how it would end. And also he said that Terence Crawford wasn't worth putting up the necessary purses for the money that they were looking for because they weren't getting a return on their investment. He said this on numerous occasions. Then he told Terence Crawford he lost so much money on him he could build a mansion in Beverly Hills from scratch. And then most recently, they were talking about fighting June 5th and admitting on all party sides, even including Manny Pacquiao, that an investment group in Abu Dhabi fell out, decided to pull back. Bob Arum admitted publicly that they had the opportunity to still make the Manny Pacquiao fight for Terence Crawford for June 5th, but they didn't see the value in it, so they didn't do it. And Terence Crawford has been sitting on the shelf ever since. But yet, you never hear Terence Crawford place blame on Bob Arum for these fights not coming to fruition. As a matter of fact, you'll hear Terence Crawford defend Bob Arum. So then, Terence Crawford been chasing Manny Pacquiao for 5 years. Never placed blame on Manny Pacquiao for the fight never happening. But he's continuously tell you that it's Errol Spence's fault the fight didn't happen. But Errol Spence told Terence Crawford and the world 60-40 split, let's make it happen. Which is suffice because you look at the pay-per-view numbers, as Errol Spence stated, I'm a bigger brand, I deserve a bigger share of the split. And he's rightfully so. Look at the pay-per-view numbers. Terence Crawford has done 2 pay-per-views in his career. Victor Postol, which did 50,000 pay-per-view buys, and Amir Khan, which did 150. So 50 to 60. That's combined 210,000 pay-per-view buys in 2 pay-per-views. Errol Spence's lowest pay-per-view against Danny Garcia did 315 to 320,000 pay-per-view buys. That's over 100,000 more pay-per-view buys than 2 of Terence Crawford's pay-per-view buys combined. That's not to mention the pay-per-view he did with Mikey Garcia and the pay-per-view he did with Shawn Porter. So he's clearly the bigger brand outside of the ring. And that's not up for debate. As we see, Errol Spence has did the big engrossing live gate than anybody in boxing, including Canelo Alvarez and Gervonta Tank Davis. He came in at number 1, Canelo came in 2, and Tank came in 3. So he's clearly the bigger brand and the bigger star outside the ring. So when he asked for a 60-40 split, Terence Crawford said it had to be 50-50 or there was no fight. So it's you that stated that he wasn't the man to beat at the welterweight division. He was never your number 1 objective when you came in the welterweight division. You stated that Shawn Porter was your friend, so you wouldn't be forced into a fight with Shawn Porter. Now you're saying that the only reason the fight is happening because Shawn Porter pushed for the fight, but at the same time you're saying Shawn Porter was always the plan B, the next best option if he couldn't secure the Manny Pacquiao fight. Now you're saying that Errol Spence didn't have the same energy in fighting you, but your promoter said that he prevented the Pacquiao fight, and your promoter stated that he hadn't reached out to Al Heyman and the PBC to look to make the fight. So Terence Crawford has shown us that he's contradicted himself every time he does an interview. It's not adding up. So let's see how this fight plays out November 20th, Shawn Porter, Terence Crawford. That's all I got for y'all. Make sure you hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue. Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Hit the like button. Hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share the videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.
You're watching Blue Blood Sports TV. Wow.